Nerd Dice.
Welcome to the Stateless Codecast. This is episode number 49 in our series, nerddice.com, where we build a tabletop role-playing management application using Ruby on Rails. And we're continuing where we left off from the previous video. So in the process of creating an entity diagram with the kind of objects and tables we'll wind up using in our application. In the previous video, we kind of talked through the concepts, illustrated kind of the plan that we're going to have here, and then created kind of the hello world version of our diagram, where we took the schema file for the one table that we have so far, users, and converted that into an entity representing that table in a draw.io entity diagram at app.diagrams.net. So that's where kind of we're picking up from. If you want to go back and learn some of the concepts and explain the kind of the purpose and some of those things, I'd recommend listening to the previous video, number 48 on this series, where we kind of go through the explaining Rails models and object relationship mapping and the entity diagram, why we're using it, and all that stuff. So you can go, and I'll put that in the description of this video, and we'll go from there. So we're going to pick up where we left off. We've got a users table. Just to review some of the quirks that or idiosyncrasies that this is going to have. So you can see I don't have the timestamps listed here, so created at and updated at. If you look at here, by default those are included, and by default we're just going to assume that they're there, unless what I will do is I'll add them in if they need to be indexed. So anything that we want to query on in part of a where clause, we should create an index for. And then also, if we go back here and look at single column indexes, I'm just going to throw in the IDX abbreviation there to indicate that they're single column indexes. Foreign key, I'll put an FK there. Foreign keys should always be indexed. And then if we've got a multi-table index, multi-field index on the table, so like if we wanted to do an index on sign-in count and email or something like that, then I'll put a note on the table indicating that kind of special treatment there. I'll also, for things like rich text fields and other things like that, I'll probably put a weak entity box like within the table that has those rich text fields in it. They won't actually be columns on that table, but they will be they'll act like it. So thinking like a spell description on a spell, those sorts of things that make sense to be rich text, you would kind of use active storage and action text to deal with the rich text part of that. But we'd still kind of say your spell description is acts like an attribute on your spell, and should be included in that entity diagram. So the first thing we're going to do now, and I'm still kind of torn between it, so by the end of this video I might change my mind, but I'm going to try to separate the concerns of the user login as it's managed by Devise, and then the profile of the user. So like thinking in terms of Rails relationships, user has one profile, probably dependent destroy, and then profile belongs to user and will have a user ID as its as its foreign key. Um, that that's where I'm leaning now, and we'll do that kind of first as our next table here. I'm also going to make I'm going to go to File here, Page Setup, and I'm going to go with a custom page here that is like 1,000 inches by 1,000 inches, because I don't really care about printing this, and I don't want to deal with all that other stuff. So we'll see whether that works or not. You can see our ability to scroll along here has gotten a lot bigger, and we'll go from there. So similar to before, we've got profiles would be the table name if we've got profile as a model name. I think I'm also going to go with a UUID for profile, so that you're not like trying to find your first 10 profiles, which are more likely to be administrators or whatever. And so, and then the next thing we'll have is user ID, UUID, not null, and that will be a foreign key. And then I will pause and let me first do the entity relationship here. So we've got mandatory 0 to 1. It'd be a 1 to 1. Yeah, I think 1 to mandatory is what we want here. So we'll make this primary key to the foreign key here, and that will show the relationship that we've got between these two tables. I'll pause and fill out the draft of the rest of the attributes I'll expect to have on this profiles table, and then we'll start looking at some of the other tables we'll want to create. All right, we're back, and I've already made a change in the kind of how I'm doing this. Before I had all of these IDX notes here, or indexes as IDX. I am differentiating now between unique and non-unique indexes. So all the unique indexes I'm just going to make UNIQ. So if we go back to the list of, let me see if I can make this a little bigger. The list of indices here, you can see that they all have that unique true at the end. So I want to differentiate between those two things. We've got the foreign key that we already added. Username we'd want to have be unique. And then anything that we're, so language, time zone, allow the users to specify that. Right now, I think we've only got English. Maybe as we develop this app, I'll at least throw in pirate as another option. And then if somebody is a native speaker of another language and wants to help with translations, that would be a fine way to contribute by following our contribution process. So the ability for visibility, so kind of private versus public, those sorts of things, and maybe with some gradations between kind of like a paranoia levels or whatever. But that's just kind of, at this point, notional. Phone, to allow for somebody to find by phone, find by email, find by username, if the user allows for that. All booleans defaulted to false. and then allow search by username, which would probably have some rules around it. So if you are allowing search by username, obviously you'd allow find by username, etc. But kind of just ideas for attributes that you might care about from a profile user. Feel free to open issues or suggest other attributes. We'll probably, even as we go through the rest of this process, probably think of other things that we'll add here. And then we've got I threw a line divider in here, so those virtual attributes. So an avatar would be an active storage image, and then description, profile description would be rich text. So that's kind of what we've got so far on profiles. Now we can start thinking about D&D itself, or tabletop role-playing more generally, perhaps. So D&D has character sheets, and then so we can take a look at these things and start thinking about what. So we probably it makes sense to have a characters table with attributes like name. Race is probably going to wind up being its own object. So you elves and dwarves and humans and variant humans and everything have their own rules and bonuses and all those things. So it'll probably be allowing for a choice among a bunch of different objects there. Background similarly is going to be a list of objects that have different personality traits, ideals, bonds, flaws, background features. Those would all be kind of based on that background object with the ability to add additional traits, ideals, bonds, flaws, etc. Player name will probably wind up being just the based on the profile, that profile's username. Alignment, probably a enumerated pick list. Experience points. Level, so classes are going to be their own objects, and then in at least in 5th edition D&D, you've got character level that advances from 1 to 20 based on experience points and stuff, and then you've got a class level. So you could be like a 15th level character who's a 9th level fighter and a 6th level wizard or whatever. And so thinking along those lines, you'd need to have probably some sort of a intermediary table with your class levels for that character. Other attributes, skills, will probably there'll probably be a table of skill definitions, and then you would have I don't think we're going to go through and necessarily have all of these as columns on your character object itself. Things like, for example, that acrobatics is a dexterity-based skill. That's an attribute of the skill, not an attribute directly on the character. Ability scores, and you have to think your array of ability scores that you're starting with, where you're assigning those ability scores from the array to your 6 ability scores that you've got there, and then you have to be able to modify them via race bonuses, feat bonuses, ability score increases, all those types of things. And then attacks and spell casting, so you can think about kind of attackable, almost maybe like a polymorphic association, where you could have spells, weapons, other entities that have the ability to cause damage that would have an attack bonus, a damage type, etc. hit dice, which would probably be a function of your character levels, death saves, uh, current hit points, temporary hit points, speed, which can be a function of both your race class, feats, features, that sort of thing. And then money, currency sorts of things. That might be a campaign level thing. So you could have maybe not all campaigns have copper pieces, or maybe you want to allow for, and we need to think about this in defining the campaign, whether those different types of money can be renamed. So, like, instead of gold pieces, maybe you call them golden dragons in one campaign or something like that. Things like that. Um, Proficiencies, languages, a lot of these things will be you kind of have almost like your blueprint for those things, and then kind of an association between uh, your character and the proficiencies. So maybe a join table character's proficiencies, that sort of thing. And then age, height, weight. Those are just attributes of your character. Um, you need probably some rich text things for backstory, um, kind of inventory. So you're thinking treasure, both magic items, mundane items, weapons, armor, those sorts of things. Spells. So you could have a spell list. You could either get that from your class, from features, from boons, etc. And then things like spellcasting ability would be defined by your class, other um, situations like that. So that's kind of where we'll start in terms of a character sheet. I'll make an iteration of this. Actually, I'll probably do create a campaign object first, and then work on the character object. So we'll be back with the draft of that. All right. So just in progress here. I'm starting to look at like campaigns and campaign settings before I deal with characters, and before I had these like divider lines here to show the difference between the kind of the actual database attributes and the virtual ones that are given through active storage. When I went to move my table, you can see that the lines didn't go with it. So I'm going to change this around, get rid of these lines here. Instead of doing that, I'm going to take these rows in the style here. I'm just going to make them dark gray. The Abagar. Dark gray here. I'm not all the way done with, and I probably will rearrange things into these two tables or among these two tables as time goes on, just throughout the course of doing this design effort. The one thing I'm going to do next is campaigns. There'll be an owner here, but there'll also be like a campaign members join table between them. So I'll do that and then rearrange things and be back in a moment. All right, so I'm back again. I've got campaigns, campaign setting, campaign member here. The idea being campaign can have many members, and you can be a member of many campaigns, so that's kind of a join style table. Rather than making it a true join table, like with no primary key or anything like that, it has attributes of itself, like your role in the campaign, whether you're an admin in the campaign. So I kind of made it its own kind of intermediate kind of little model between the two. And then campaign setting, I noted here, if you've got a shared setting, let's say Eberron or something like that, different DMs could have different campaigns in Eberron. And then like you wouldn't want to like have a dependent destroy where like the the person who created the Eberron record deactivates their account on the site, and then like all campaigns cascade destroy on it or something like that. So need to solve for that, but at least from a draft data model setting, let me zoom back in a bit here so this is a little easier to read. Can I drag around? I guess it's mouse wheel to go up and down. So that's kind of what we've got here. The created by ID might, I probably rename that owner ID. And it might be possible to like have like a system moderator type user or something like that that would kind of become the default owner, or you could think about assigning it to one of the other people who have the campaigns in the campaign setting, or we'll figure that out later. It's not a super important feature. So now I'm going to start looking at characters. So one of the things I want to note about the character is that like a character can be kind of owned just by a user and not part of a campaign, or kind of owned by a user and part of the campaign. And we only want to destroy the character if the user gets destroyed. We want to cascade delete that only if the character is not involved in a campaign. So like you wouldn't want to like destroy everything related to the history of that character in the campaign if the user leaves the site. So kind of it'll either be controlled by the campaign. If you destroy the campaign, it will destroy the character, or it'll be controlled by the user if it's kind of I'm just playing around with character creation and want to deal with that. So I'll start the first iteration of this character table. I'm probably going to throw in a lot of stuff that I'm going to break out later and then break it out. So we'll try to kind of map these items from the character sheet that we were looking at earlier into a set of tables that represent a character. Be back with a first pass at this. All right, I'm back to talk through the next iteration of this character, or the first iteration of this character table. I did add a few more attributes to the campaign table here, so kind of allow standard array 15, the 815, so 3/8, 3/15s, point by system, allow rolled stats, and then a rolled stat method override, which will wind up using the Rubygem nerd dice that I've done another series on to assist with that. And then our character may or may not have a campaign ID. The race ID, so the character will have a race. We'll have a races table that provides kind of some of those things, and maybe some like features that you get from it. There'll probably be like a character features table as well. Original class ID, so this matters for multi-classing in terms you'd want to know what the original like level 1 class was when dealing with class, like character class levels. So that even though the like class ID overall you could be multi-class, the original class matters there. Name, status, that's the status of the character. So like if you're doing character creation, you want to be able to have like a draft character, because and at certain stages of character creation we could make certain attributes required or not required, change how we validate things. At a database level, we're going to keep most of this nullable, so that like if you've got the early stage like blank page version of this, you can save your progress and kind of incrementally work through a character creation wizard or however we design it. Let's see here, the kind of attributes that you have for your um, character appearance and stuff like that. I haven't gotten into the obviously you probably want an avatar for your character, kind of a rich text for your character's backstory, that sort of thing. Character level, and then you've got kind of the raw values that you've placed for your 6 main stats, and then whether you have inspiration. So I'll come back. I'll try to do the races table, and then we'll take another look. And I'm back with another iteration. So once I started getting into the characters and trying to relate races to them, I found that most of the time the race characteristics and features were something that, rather than being an attribute of the race, at least solely, were things that are repeatable across races and potentially across other objects. So if we look at things like, I'm going to go over to the races here, dwarf, and start looking at some of the traits here. So dark vision, 60-foot dark vision can be granted by the dwarf race. It can be granted by the elf race. You can have a magic item that could grant dark vision. All these other things that could potentially allow these things. Same thing with skill proficiencies, weapon proficiencies, tool proficiencies, those sorts of things. They can be granted by a race, they can be granted by a class, they can be granted by a magic item, a feat. And so I tried to distill those things into kind of the core kind of features table that kind of just gives the name, and then um, what kind of feature it is, the attribute category. So thinking tools, languages, skill proficiencies, saving throws, ability scores, that sort of thing. And then the particular attribute. So like if something is granting you proficiency to athletics or something like that, the skill attribute category would be skills, attribute name would be athletics. Um, there are like a lot of these, like thinking the half elf and variant human, you can take 2 of any for an ability score increase. So for some of these things, it could be in addition to the attribute name, there could be any for some of these. Um, and I'll make that a string. It would get potentially complicated if I made that just an enum, but we might still go that route. Um, but thinking, depending on what your category is, you could do something like a dependent drop down or pick list or something like that that kind of shows the second set of attribute names based on your attribute category, so that you can't have 2 plus 2 equals 5 type stuff. You can handle that via validations in your model, as well as your UI. Let's see here, advantage type. So thinking something could grant advantage, it can grant disadvantage. Is detrimental. So thinking things like the race feature of the drow, sun's feature, the detriment sunlight sensitivity, or something that's granted by a cursed item could potentially be detrimental to you. I still decided to call a table feature rather than like calling it a bug or something like that if it's detrimental. That there's essentially the same two sides of the same coin there. Um, Features and curses, I'll call them. Whether or not the um, proficiency modifier, so something like expertise can double your proficiency bonus. Jack of all trades for bard can grant half your proficiency bonus, and then your most common proficiency modifier would be one. Whether or not something has a recharge, the recharge type, so it could be long rest, short rest, day, and then some of these things are fixed limit, and some of them are ability based, so up to your charisma modifier or something like that for bardic inspiration. Um, and then defensive damage modification type, so things like slashing, piercing, bludgeoning, force, fire, thunder, those sorts of things. And then the applicable. So first was the damage modification type. So that would be immunity, resistance, or vulnerability if you are thinking in terms of detrimental things. Um, and then a description rich text. And then what I've started to do here is a rule features table. I'm not super sold on the name. I might workshop that. But this is going to be a polymorphic table where it will always have a feature ID and then a what I'm calling at the moment a rule featureable ID, which could be a race, a class, a feat, a background, um, magic item, those sorts of things. And then the featureable ID and featureable type, those are aspects of a polymorphic relationship. So if we go back to our Rails guides here, and it wouldn't be in associations, polymorphic association. So this would be an example here. So if you have imageable on your employee and your product, they would be the imageable ID would be employee and your employee ID, or product and your product ID. So that's kind of how that works. We'll cover it in more detail when we get to actually developing it in the application. And then back to our entity model. So I think you're going to have rule features and then character features as well. So something that has kind of this character ID and a rule featureable ID, and those things can be granted. The rule features, I also added things like name override. So you could have your general feature would be um, damage resistance, and then the the race version of that for Dragonborn would be Draconic Ancestry, and you'd get, if you chose a red dragon, you'd get a feature of fire damage, but you'd rename it like Red Dragon Ancestry damage reduction, or however you wanted to do it. And then minimum level type, so either class level, character level, and then the minimum level if one applies, subtype. Um, so that's thinking about things like for classes, especially whether this is an original like level one feature or a multi-class available or additional levels feature, things like that, so that when we go back to this original class ID, you'll be able to know what applies to the class features and whether they're available to multi-class. Some of those other myriad of other things that can grant features could also be put in that category. So I'll get back to the drawing board. I did add in the avatar and description to the character. And the description and I don't know whether a race um, needs an avatar, but we'll continue on. All right, so I'm back again to talk about another iteration of this data model. I'm zoomed out a bit right now to 50%. This data model is getting larger here. If we zoom in back to normal size, you can see that the features table that I talked about previously has kind of become itself a polymorphic table where you've got featureable ID and featureable type, and things like skills, tools, languages are all things that you can have a proficiency in that have kind of their own attributes. So, kind of that sort of thing feeding into featureable features, and then you can have the rule features that kind of connect it to your races, classes, backgrounds, etc. Um, Weapon types, armor types. So I'm going to distinguish between, um, and this is going to happen with other things like monster stat blocks and um, kind of the some of the classes and other things like that, where you've got to kind of got the template for creating these things, so the properties of this weapon type, and then you'd have an instance of a longsword or whatever. Like you'd have the definition there, but then you'd have an instance of it in your inventory, or you'd have a weapon that is a weapon type longsword, but it's magical, so it's also a magic item and things like that. Similar with armor types. In both cases, if we take a look at the weapons section in the player's handbook, and I'll bring it up to a little bit larger. So this is something that fits well into a table. So you've got the name, the category, so uh, simple or martial, and then melee or range. Those are all kind of combinations of properties. Damage, you've got your damage die and number of dice, damage type, weight, base cost, and then most of these properties, other than the range ones, are just booleans. They're the light and thrown can each be considered booleans. So that's what I did in this weapon types section here. Whether it's melee or ranged, you can't have something that's both melee and ranged, like a thrown hammer, or a hand axe, dagger. Um, Whether it takes ammunition, whether it's finesse, heavy, two-handed, etc. And then armor is similar, where you've got kind of the properties of those things. I'm noticing, it, and you can see it happen with this relation going into the kind of through these other tables. I'm probably going to rearrange this so that right now it's kind of a top left to bottom right type of design, and I'm going to space things out more and start to make it more kind of like spoke and hub type of design for it, or visual for it, so that things like features, I'm leaving enough space around for all the different items that are associated with it. Profiles are probably going to wind up being similarly needing to connect across a bunch of different things. And then, yeah, we'll continue on. The one note is that when I make the classes table, I can't call it class. So there are certain words in Ruby and in Rails that are reserved words, and class is one of them. So I'm going to have to name the model in the table something like character class and character classes for the table, so that I don't wind up using the Ruby reserved word class, which we use to define all of the different um, um, Ruby object definitions for your classes and stuff like that. So we're gonna have to name that, and then we can still have it show up as class in our app, but we'll have to use the Rails internationalization and labels to essentially make that model names label in English class. So that's kind of the way it's going to have to work. I'll come back. I'm probably not going to come back with too many more different iterations unless something's particularly interesting. This video is running long and it's taken a period of days, not constant work, but in real life have elapsed since the beginning of this video. But we'll come back kind of at the end and summarize it unless something really interesting pops out between now and then. All right, we are back. I've aged 15 months before your very eyes. Previous clip, we were zoomed at around 55%. Now we're zoomed at 18%. This entity diagram kind of looks like a conspiracy board. Let's dig into some of the highlights of what we're doing here. Also, in the course of time, and part of the reason why I'm procrastinating on this is Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition has come out with a 2024 revision to the core books. This is all still looking at the 2014 edition of version of 5th edition. So any of this would be subject to change if you wanted to accommodate the 2024 revision to the game. It's still, I think, remains to be seen how much it'll be adopted across tables, how much of it we'll take what we like from 2024 and still go with 2014, or we'll do the other way around. We'll keep some stuff we like from 2014 and go into 2024. All of that is out of the scope of this entity diagram, which is already really intricate. I'll zoom in some and talk about some of the things that are involved. Things like inventory items. So this is kind of maybe a couple of layers of polymorphic associations. Inventory item would go to a character or an NPC, and it's kind of, you've got your item ID, your equipable ID, which could be a magic item, which I've got. Here, a magic item, a weapon type, an armor type. It could just be an item, so I've got like generic item type things. Weapon type, you would have like your weapon type here would be an item, or it would be a magic item, because like you may have a magic sword or just a normal sword, and then in each character's inventory they may have 0 or more of those things. So you've got like a quantity here. So if you've got, for example, things that you might have, torches or days of rations or something like that, where it's common to have more than one on your character, instead of having a new row for each one of those things, you just have like the fact that you've got rations, and then your quantity would indicate that. Getting into things like spells, spell list items, which would be part of that rules feature. So some spells will be on a spell list, but it could be, you could be getting it from your class, you could be getting it from your subclass, you could be getting it from a feature like the Bard's magical secrets. So trying to keep things as flexible as they can while still being um, able to work with a object relational mapping system. Um, Things like campaigns, campaign sessions. So like throughout your uh, time of running your campaign, you could potentially look at eventually having a scheduling feature or something like that. Note that I'm using campaign sessions here and not sessions, just in terms of a web application session kind of has its own kind of behavior. So I kind of use it almost as a quasi reserved word and try not to name my my actual model name session when it's about a campaign session. Um, and then you could have multiple encounters across sessions. So you could have an encounter that stretches across 3 sessions. You could have 10 encounters in 1 session, trying to resolve those sorts of things. I'm going to have this, I'm not going to go into much more detail than this on this video here. I'll have it in my the stateless code repo, and I'll have it linked in the video description. And then I'll probably also incorporate it in the wiki for the nerddice.com project. The other thing that we'll wind up doing is maybe keeping this. So I'm going to commit it to Git and push it to the stateless code kind of profile repo. And then as we make changes, which I'm sure will come, we'll wind up kind of trying to keep that entity diagram up to date so that people can kind of see the evolution of that. We'll talk about we'll do a retrospective. Haven't done one in 18 months now. So we started working on this in October 2023. It is now January 2025. You can see that this is really getting to be a pretty complex data model. Dungeons and Dragons is got a lot of data and stuff that goes into there. I'm sure I'm missing stuff. So if you think that there are parts of this that or data aspects of the game that need to be accounted for in the entity diagram that are not, hit us up in the comments with your suggestions, and we'll also evaluate. We'll talk about more in the retro, the priority of continuing on in this Nerd Dice project, considering how big of an undertaking it is. I might wind up prioritizing some other stuff that's smaller and more manageable, whereas this is this. If you see an entity diagram like this, you're looking at, in like non-solo development, probably a 7-figure app. So just keep that in mind when you're getting into that much kind of involved data entity design. Rails does it better. I think we'll do it better than just about anything in terms of bang for your buck per programmer hour of effort. This is Rails, I think, is manageable as a solo effort for a project this size, whereas if you tried to get a entity model like this into something that uses Java Spring Boot API microservices and a different JavaScript front end framework and all that stuff, then you're looking into a whole bunch of effort and cost to try to get something like this off the ground. But we'll see you in the retro, and thanks for watching. Thanks for watching this Stateless Code video. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and spread the word. Check out our growing library of videos on our social media channels. Follow us at Stateless Code. And taxation is theft.